Okay, welcome back, guys. I'm in a new spot. You got a couch behind me, so no longer at the desk front. Life is living good. Corstian rocking the Cubs sweater. I think they're knotted up with the Pirates, I believe, at two apiece. So should be fun game there.
Mhm.
How are you doing? How was your weekend?
It's been all right. Uh, the 53-man roster cuts are happening like right now, or did they just happen a little bit ago? So, just kind of seeing that last bit of preseason, kind of guessing who's going to be on the remaining 53-man rosters, and then actually seeing that come to fruition today was kind of something that I don't know. I've been kind of keeping track of. A couple surprises, a couple. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Kind of moves, but yeah.
What did you think of the Jahan Dotson trade to the Eagles?
um, I thought it was interesting where I think he definitely, at least on the Eagles, he definitely moves into that wide receiver 3 spot. I think the depth behind Smith and Brown were pretty weak, and so it makes sense for them to make a move for somebody at least. But then on the Commanders, um, I feel like that's the more interesting side where he's a former first round pick, and you trade him away for a third rounder plus a couple late round pick swaps, and that's kind of how you're valuing him, which I think said a lot on how they viewed his development, and how well I guess they saw Diami Brown and Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah, just seeing a couple moves there. I really like the move personally. Um, I think while Anaya Smith is getting ready, this is like a perfect number three option. He's gonna get a lot of matchups because you got Goddard, you got Brown, you got Smith, and you got
Mm-hmm.
Saquon. He's gonna get a lot of one-on-one matchups, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're playing zone or not, just because of like the gravity a guy like AJ Brown brings and a Saquon brings. I think he's gonna have very explosive weeks. He's a nice best ball player to me that I would target if you play in that format. I'm not in any best ball leagues, but I really like the situation Jahan Dotson's in. The Eagles completely just revamped their talent on offense,
Mm-hmm.
even though they literally kept the same AJ Brown, Dallas Goddard, Devonta Smith core. I look at their offense completely differently now with this move because John Dotson isn't like the sexiest name as far as production goes, but he has some splash. He has some splash seasons. I think this is like a perfect situation for him. So I really like the trade personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with what you said about best ball. Um, yeah, realistically, I don't know if Dotson will exceed his stats of the past 2 seasons that he's had. And that's just being behind, so many other options in this offense where realistically, he is the fifth or sixth uh, option in this offense, which it's hard to get your targets, but like you said, he'll get a lot of opportunity for one-on-one matchups where teams don't really be focusing in on him, where he can kind of abuse kind of guys further down the depth chart in terms of coverage. But um, yeah, I'm interested to see how Washington, how their team ends up playing out with just kind of I don't know, a younger-ish receiving room that we haven't seen a lot outside of Terry McLaurin from. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's gonna be a struggle fest for Jaden Daniels. I really do.
Hmm.
I know he's getting a lot of buzz during preseason, but you look at the types of plays and you look at Cliff Kingsbury. Gosh, I couldn't get that word out. Um, but you look at his offense, like you take away Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, there wasn't a lot that really impressed you with
Hmm.
his offense. So I think it's a very difficult offense for like a rookie like Jaden Daniels to pick up.
Hmm.
Whereas like he doesn't have like the supporting cast that a Caleb Williams does. Like I think it's a completely different story. So I think he's gonna have like flashes, but like I think he's gonna struggle this season. Where it's gonna be like a roller coaster ride. So
Hmm.
he's the one rookie QB I would be cautious of in fantasy. Um, as far as his situation, and I think losing Jahan Dotson even hurts his situation more. Like personally, I would have tried to keep him if I were the Commanders, but
Hmm.
I'm not in the front office, so I have no idea.
Hmm.
Alrighty, why don't you go ahead and give us your number 10 guy? I'm gonna come back and provide some lighting in this room.
Okay. Okay, so for my number 10 tight end, he has been like kind of the fantasy darling that hasn't panned out literally every year after his rookie season, where everybody's like, oh, this will be his year to bounce back, and then he doesn't. Everybody is still saying maybe this will be his year. We'll see. I'm hopeful for him. Rookie year, he put up 1,000 receiving yards from the tight end position, which blew everybody away. But this is Kyle Pitts from Atlanta, and like, despite I guess his struggles in terms of yardage from the past couple seasons outside of his rookie, he still put up 667 receiving yards last season, which isn't great, but it's not terrible. Especially just with kind of how off that just offensive attack was. But I definitely see some sort of bounce back. Maybe not 1,000 yards, but if he gets up to that 800 to 900 receiving yard range, I think people will be back on the Kyle Pitts train, and that really is only just like 200-ish extra receiving yards away, which isn't too much more compared to what he was doing last season. So I had him here at my number 10 spot.
Yeah, I disagree with where you placed him. So spoiler alert, he is on this list for me. I just have it differently. For me, he's the perfect example of a guy who was in a crappy situation, and that's why you see the numbers that where they were. Because you look at the talent all around, like Bijan, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, they're all underutilized across the board. So for me, the stats don't really tell the whole story. When I look at Kyle Pitts, I'm looking at his efficiency. And the fact that since his rookie season, he's had more touchdowns, but like lesser like explosive plays. And his average yards per reception have gone down. I think it's just been the function of the offense where he's been used because he's a guy that you could be used anywhere on the field. He's a matchup weapon. I think no matter who's at quarterback, whether it's Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix, I think automatically you can chalk him up for 800 to 1,000 yards at least.
Mm-hmm.
And by that nature, I would consider him like a higher than where you ranked him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just looking at it from like projecting him into the season. So keep in
Mm-hmm.
mind that like these rankings are kind of like a culmination of the past. And then for me with tight end specifically, I'm also projecting how they're going to do going forward
Mm-hmm.
as well. So it's kind of finding that balance and looking at the situation there. So I agree that he should be on the top 10 list. It's just a matter of difference here.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I really struggle to place this player on the top 10 list because right now he's coming into the season dealing with an injury. Stuck with a bad quarterback play towards like the bottom half of the season. He's played on 2 teams so far. Former top 10 pick out of the tight end factory in Iowa. Had a pretty good season. Almost hit 1,000 yards on 5 touchdowns, 95 receptions. And he's only played 1 full season, but I think he's still a quality talent who's proven he's a matchup nightmare against any single cornerback, safety, linebacker. I wish there were better quarterbacks throwing him the ball so we can really see the talent that he has. But for me, TJ Hockenson is a number 1 option on any given team. I just feel like I can't rank him higher than where I have him now because I don't know what to expect going into Sam Darnold's season and the fact he's coming off of injury. That's really it. I know, like, in any given season, you rank him in the top 10. I think this is one of those unique years where I see more talented players or equally talented players in better situations than he is in right now. And that's kind of leading me to rank him this low. But if Sam Darnold pans out, I think he can put up a top 5 season at the position. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good valuation for him. I have him on my list as well. He's a little bit higher, and I think the concerns about quarterback play are slightly overblown. I think last season was kind of proof that this offense will feed the playmakers kind of regardless, as we saw with Justin Jefferson and Hockenson just last season, and how much they produced. And like, if if they had bad seasons with bad quarterbacks, then it would make more sense that I would maybe even put him outside of the top 10. But the fact that, most of the season was not with Kirk Cousins and he put up these numbers kind of convinced me that he should be a little bit higher on this list.
I think the thing with me is, despite playing like a number one option, he's never hit 1,000 yards. Like last season was the closest he's hit. So that also factored into it a little bit for me too. Because I'm looking at this play, I'm like, he should be commanding 8 to 9 targets even before like he was in the same situation as Justin Jefferson. Um, and the fact that he hasn't hit 1,000 yards has been surprising me. Part of it's been like he's not been able to play like the full amount of games in the season or majority amount of the games. He's had a couple seasons where he's had 10 games, 7 games played. But I think regardless of how you get to the 1,000, I feel like this is the one stat that really matters to me. Like the receiving starters. Like this is a type of player where it's like he should be a lot better than what his stats say he is, because I know he has that potential.
Yeah. I will say though, I mean, it's like a pretty small list of guys like tight ends who have hit 1,000 yards, and so to like make that the benchmark of how you're ranking these guys, I feel like it's a bit of a tight ship to do. I mean, which is why you obviously have Kyle Pitts higher, which it makes sense. But I mean, Hockenson also missed 2 games. In those 2 games, I don't think it's hard to assume that he could have hit that 1,000 yard mark, but obviously,
Yeah, even with one game, I think he would have hit it. Like I can, regardless of the receiving stat, I can chalk Hockenson for at least 50 yards a game. Like that's an automatic. So
yeah, and so
I
like,
think he could have easily hit it this past season. But it's also Justin Jefferson was out like half a season, so it's like, it's like, can he do it with the Justin Jefferson on the field? It remains to be seen. But I think with better quarterback play, you'll see a lot more of him. So I think, well, part of it's his fault per se with like staying on the field, but like the other part is like just the quarterback situation around him. Like when he's played, it's just been bad luck because he was on the Lions when they were just trying to find themselves. Coming in when Matthew Stafford was on the back half of his career, and Jared Goff just trying to find himself, and Detroit was rebuilding. And then he gets traded to the Vikings, and then the next season, the Detroit's really good. The Vikings are kind of like been like average, but they're putting up all these numbers, but then somehow like he's not hitting the numbers you kind of expect out of elite tight ends or elite options at the number one receiving spot. So I'm a little bit hard on him, I'll admit that. And then also his injury coming in is something just to take note of.
Cool. I guess it's back to me with my number 9 guy. This guy, he comes from a loaded offense, and so I'll say that he still puts up good numbers, but he hasn't quite had the ceiling, or at least the opportunities to have the same type of like high caliber seasons as a lot of these other guys in this top 10 list. But I feel like every time he's been on the field, he's been like, he's drawn targets. He's been efficient in what he does. This is Dallas Goedert. Last season, he only played 14 games, so he missed a couple due to injury. Put up 592 yards. If you average that out, it turns into about a 700-yard season, which I don't think is too awful considering the weapons you got and the fact that I wouldn't necessarily say the Eagles are like a strong passing team, despite how talented the quarterback and the receivers are. But yeah, so I just have him here at 9. I think, I don't know, I like his blocking upside a little bit more than I do with Kyle Pitts, and so that's kind of just the difference between that. And even though he's been hurt, I feel like, it's hard to compare the situations because they're so different. So it's hard to say, oh, I like Goddard's because of this one Kyle Pitts situation, so whatever. But I just have him at 9 there.
Yeah, my number 9 guy is a very similar player. He's usually the second or third option on his team because he's in another loaded offense, and then he just barely missed out on 600 receiving yards this season. It's also Dallas Goedert. So, yeah, I agree with your ranking here. I think if he was the number 1 or 2 option on this team, like instead of like if there was no Devonta Smith, like you would see better numbers from him. And yeah, the injury did suck last season. he's another guy where it's like it's kind of hypocritical of me to put him here and Hockenson below him when he's also never had a 1,000-yard season, but like he's never
Uh-huh.
had the receiving season that Hawkinson's had. So that's the weird part here um, for me. But I think with him, the reason why I would probably put him where I put him is because he kind of forced Zach Ertz out of the Eagles offense. Like that kind of
Hmm.
shows like how talented this guy is. And every time he has the ball, like it's going for an efficient gain. He's like forcing 20-yard throws like his way, even with an AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. So I think with those numbers, provided with like what Jalen Hurts does on the ground, I think that's why I have him more higher than TJ Hawkinson because you could still produce around the same numbers as Hawkinson
Hmm.
and just on a better team. So that means like to me, he makes the most out of his opportunities. And you take a deeper look into his average receiving yards per reception, much lower than TJ Hawkinson's over the span of his career, but doesn't lose many fumbles at all. I think it's lost 3 over the total amount of his career out of 4 fumbles. So like
Hmm.
definitely protects the ball over his 8-year span. So that's one impressive stat about Dallas Goedert to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's like from here on out, like I don't necessarily, I don't know if I'll see him putting up the top tier tight end numbers, but I feel like we've seen enough from him that he's shown his value. He's good.
Another best ball guy you want, and I mean in fantasy, if like all the elite, sexy young options are not there, definitely a guy you can rely on because he's coming from a good offense. So you're not going to get like one reception for 20 yards out of him.
Hmm. Okay. Next up on my list, um, he started his career. I think he was a first round pick, but he's kind of late. He's been on two teams, I think. And his first team is kind of labeled as a bust. He kind of people said he like alligator arms, butterfingers, and whatnot, but he was always like a super high potential kind of guy. Didn't seem like he'd pan out. Then he switched teams, and since then, he's kind of been a nice steady option. Last season, he put up 963 yards, and he was able to play. He played the whole season, which I think early on in his career there may have been talk about injury concerns of just how often can you see on the field, but obviously we've seen that he played a whole season here. This is Evan Engram with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Uh, it's I feel like he's really underrated. Where, like in a lot of fantasy drafts, I've been trying to get after him just because, he, like he put up almost 1,000 receiving yards last season from the tight end position. It's probably like last year's probably the number 2 target after Christian Kirk, despite how well Ridley played. But like, yeah, I feel like a lot of people sleep on him, especially with the emergence of a lot of young tight ends and just come to the older staples in the league right now. And so, I don't know, he's a guy that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, no, I love this pick where you have him. He's also a guy you would want to take in fantasy. Like definitely the value he's at right now, perfect pick from the tight end spot. I think the tight end position in fantasy has come back because there's at least like 10 or 12 guys you would want to have on your team. And a couple years ago, you wouldn't say that about the squad, but I think the young talent that's coming has been amazing. Ever since he's worked with um, receiver coach Drew Lieberman in the offseason, he's improved his route running and attack of the football. And Drew Lieberman's a guy who's like really renowned for working with guys like Mohamed Sanu. I think Julian Edelman as well. Like he is really great about the technique aspect, and that's a reason you don't see as many drops as you saw him when he was on the Giants. To
Mm-hmm.
command 143 targets on a Jacksonville Jaguars team that wasn't really proficient in the back half of the season is really impressive. Um, he definitely has Trevor Lawrence's trust, and despite of all the change at the receiving position, he's the constant. He's a guy I would target as well in fantasy, and he also happens to be my number 8 tight end as well. So I think we're back on the similarity spectrum with our options here, but really
Uh-huh.
impressive numbers. And despite like the up and down season with the Giants, you look at his fumble stats compared to Dallas Goedert. He's had 5 fumbles and he's lost 4 of them in the same amount of span, basically, as Dalton Goedert. And he's played more seasons, arguably. Like, this is what? He's going into his 8th season. So, yeah, very impressive stats from Evan Engram. I think I think he's not on the roller coaster train anymore. He was to start his season, but he's figured out how to. He's become Tony Gonzalez, and the fact in like Tony Gonzalez's first couple seasons, not know how to catch a football
Hmm.
for his life, and all of a sudden he worked on his technique and he found out. Evan Ingram's the modern day version of that, as far as like overcoming his limitations. So jump on the Evan Ingram train this season in fantasy if you're able to. You'll definitely get a value out of tight end. Plus, like the guys that you picked instead of Sam LaPorta and Travis Kelce will help you out a ton with an Evan Ingram. So I think you're getting better value here.
Hmm. Yeah, good choice.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks. Okay, so going on to my number 7 guy. He was in like technically a crowded tight end room, which really is just like 2 tight ends. But he was a rookie. So this really, condenses the list down to only just a couple players right here. But he started on the year kind of as the backup tight end. The starter, I think he got hurt, and so he was able to get into that starting role, which kind of just he kind of exploded and kind of took the role from the starter. I'm sure you kind of have a better idea who this is now, but I think after this rookie campaign of his and just a couple other of the rookies, everybody's super high on this class. He put up 673 yards last season with just 16 games total, but he obviously wasn't starting the first part of the season. This is Dalton Kincaid. And I think there's a chance, I think his ceiling is a lot higher than this number 7 spot that I put him in. He could be up to like the number 4 range, during this season. But I think the one thing was just the fact that he is a rookie, or he was a rookie going into a second season. We'll kind of see how this year plays out. But I mean, there really isn't too many knocks I have on the way he plays football.
Yeah. No, I love the spot here you have him at. You took him more like a floor, and this was my favorite tight end coming out of that rookie class the year before this last season. And I really love his talent. I think he's a number 1 option on the Bills, to be quite frank. Yeah, not the Chicago Bulls. I wish you saw the Bears. But yeah, I mean, this guy is just going to keep getting better and better and better. Modern day Kelce. I really believe in his talent. Yeah, he's you've noticed even with Dawson Knox on the roster, I wasn't afraid to target of this guy because I knew he was a different type of player that Dawson Knox wasn't. Like you don't see Dawson Knox running in up and out like 20 yards down the sideline. Kincaid can do that.
Mhm.
And I think even though you lose Stephon Diggs, not really losing out on offensive production because of what this guy brings. And he's going to bring gravity to guys like Shakir and Coleman. He's one of the reasons why I'm not too worried about the Bills' offense
Mhm.
going into this season. I really like the ranking you have here. My number 7 guy is a guy who put up 1,000 yards in his rookie season. Is going into a very, very favorable situation, regardless of who's quarterback this season, because of the offensive weapons around him, new scheme, and the fact that he doesn't have a Jonnu Smith outproducing him for several weeks in the same season. It's Kyle Pitts. He's another guy in fantasy that people are scared to take because they got bit before by taking him. And I think this is an entirely new regime and situation as far as like coaching staff, where he's going to be used a lot better. You're not going to see 3 touchdowns out of him. You're going to see more like 800, 900 yards. Definitely going to see 20 more receptions than he had last season. I would jump net. Like Kyle Pitts and Evan Ingram are probably my targets going into draft, just because people are too scared to take them and they want to take the Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, Sam LaPorta, Travis as early as they can. Those are like the 4 guys people are focused on targeting, while these guys are just sliding because of history and previous production. I wouldn't look at that. I would look at the situation you're going into right now with Kyle Pitts and the surrounding cast. I think they're going to be used a lot better. Atlanta's going to be a better team overall. And you're going to see more opportunities for him to put up better than 3 receiving touchdowns. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of going off like your little fantasy bit there too. Like, I feel like there's probably 12, maybe 15 tight ends that I'd be comfortable, having season long in fantasy. Like obviously, guys like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, maybe Trey McBride, will have maybe higher like ceilings overall in terms of having like huge multi-touchdown, 100+ yard receiving games. But I'm pretty comfortable with the rest of the guys getting a couple catches for 50-ish yards, maybe a touchdown, and like being completely fantasy relevant all season, which I think is pretty crazy. You kind of talked about that earlier too, how it's more of a tight end friendly fantasy kind of climate that we're into right now.
And that's just the league that it's gravitating towards. You have like 2 tight end sets and like condensed formations. Those types of offenses are where you want to target a tight end. Like George Kittle, like Kyle Pitts is going to run into that situation because Zach Robinson's come from the Rams scheme. Shane Baldwin used to be a coordinator on the Rams. You're going to see a lot of looks like that for Cole Kmet, Sam LaPorta, Ben Johnson. He runs a very similar scheme with the condensed formations. You're just opening more opportunities for tight ends to be on linebackers and safeties, and the talent of these tight ends are a lot better from the receiving game. So that is why we're seeing the spike in tight ends right now. With Pitts specifically, last season, Arthur Smith would employ a lot of static route concepts because of the shortcomings that Desmond Ridder brought. So, like receiving options and tight ends largely depend on the quarterback play. Like, if Drake London had more dynamic routes, I might have pushed for him to have top 10 like on this list because of the production he would have put up as a result. But because of Desmond Ridder, you're not seeing those concepts. I think with an experienced guy like Kirk Cousins, and even my prediction on like how Michael Penix is going to be in the league, you're going to see a lot more dynamic route concepts, plays that break down, and guys who can create when the play breaks down that allow Pitts to get scripted, unscripted, and more dynamic opportunities to be the weapon that he is. Because he's dangerous when he has a lot of open space and a QB that is an accurate thrower that can throw him into spaces where he can run after the catch because he's dangerous that way. That's what separates him from other tight ends.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how Kyle Pitts plays. Obviously, I had him at 10, but I'm not like upset of this ranking at all.
This is purely just projection going into the season because I know in the past he's bitten people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like honestly, you probably could have had him at like 5, and I would have been. I probably would have been like, that's an understandable ranking for him. I feel like there's quite a lot of tight ends on this list where, I feel like just based off your own personal preference and just how many good tight ends there are now in the league, you could rank them pretty high and you can rank them pretty low just because there is so much talent, which is pretty fun to see. But then now going on to my number 6 guy here. He only played 15 games this season, which is still, 15 out of 17 isn't too bad. He put up 960 yards, which I thought was pretty good. He almost reached 1,000 yards. And, this is TJ Hockenson. And I think I'm not like sure there's like the injury that he'll be coming off of that might like statistically hinder him for his end year stats, but I still think objectively like he is the number, like he is one of the better tight ends in the league right now. And then the time that he does play this season, I think he will be around this range of just how good he is. And like even if he doesn't have maybe like the crazy stats to match maybe some of these other high performing tight ends, I think he'll be a great safety option for Sam Darnold if Sam Darnold ends up struggling quite a bit this season. So I think that's kind of part of what went into my mind as well, was just the fact that I thought TJ Hockenson, he's gonna be a consistent safety option for the quarterback. Even before McCarthy was started, I was when it was the whole discussion of who's going to start. I think he was going to service well enough to help the development of either McCarthy or keep the Vikings pass attack afloat if they are making a push with Darnold.
Yeah, and I think we flipped positions literally with our last two guys we talked about with Pitts and Hockenson. With Hockenson, it's very interesting because the key thing I want to see is how he produces week 5 and 6. Because if he comes out a little bit lethargic, I'm gonna be worried because I'm gonna see I think they rushed him back too soon. So but him missing the first 4 games, it's really hard to see what this Vikings offense is even gonna be until like week 6 because he's that much of a focal point. And the guy behind him isn't as good as TJ Hockenson, obviously. So it's gonna be tough. Like obviously with Addison and Jefferson, I think they can make do, but Hockenson's on different levels than Addison. For as impressive Addison has been in different parts of his rookie season last year. So with Hockenson in particular, the first 3 or 4 games is going to be very important. How does he ramp up? Because it's one thing to be healthy enough to step on the field. Are you healthy enough to produce at like 80 to 100%? That's the question. Because that's a completely different story than like your first opportunity back on the field. It might because you're trying to get your football conditioning back. You don't get all of that when you're trying to rehab. So it's that's the one thing. That's why I'm harping on the injury so much. It's gonna be interesting to see how they ramp him up to be ready for week 5.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, my number 6 guy. This is where I get into the projections a lot with guys that have less experience, but I believe in the talent of these players. I've been on him in Dynasty, very low draft pick. I really love the talent of this player. It's another player who has kicked off Zach Ertz from his perch on a team. He's a guy that's just exploded since week 6 to produce like 825 yards on like 81 receptions, and the amount of games he played is just wild. I bet on him for 1,000 yards this season because of that. I think he might be the number 1 option towards the first half of this week. I don't think it'll be Marvin Harrison Jr. because of the ramp up period it will take for MHJ to be on the field. For me, it's Trey McBride. He makes his introduction to the top 10 this year. I'm really, really excited about the prospects of Taylor. I was so glad I had him on my fantasy rosters last season, just from knowing like what kind of talent he is and how people have slept on him since his time in Colorado. At one time, he was like the best rated tight end in draft classes, like literally the year before Dalton Kincaid, and somehow everybody forgot like Trey McBride was this good or that he existed because not many people watch the Cardinals, and not people pay attention on like who's on the Cardinals because their win-loss record doesn't dictate that they should get enough attention. But if you watch Trey McBride, you're like, that's a different guy. He's different. He has top 3 potential written all over him, except there's a lot of guys that top 3 potential over here. So he's the reason why like making top 10 lists like this is like really fun with tight ends because now there's a lot of tight ends to choose from. He's one of the 3 examples of guys who have just exploded in the past 3 seasons. I really love Trey McBride. I love watching his game.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick. I'm a big fan of him. I'm thinking now like last season. I think we just did our top 5s, which is understandable for like I think which is the easiest for the tight end position last year. But like thinking about how I would have ranked 10 tight ends last year, I'd almost have to look at like the previous season stats and then just like try to think about what the public perception was of a lot of these tight ends. I might do that later, Taylor. I don't know, but
you might have had Taysom Hill on that list for all you know, and he doesn't even play tight end like full time.
Yeah, like honestly, I'm sure a lot of people had like a Okonkwo from the Titans on their list.
He was a sleeper of mine going to last season that did pan out.
Yeah, and so like him, maybe Dawson Knox would have been like number 10 or something. Dalton Schultz is probably somewhere on there. It's kind of interesting how just an emergence of young tight ends and a couple later career breakouts have happened. But going on to my number 5 guy here, I'm kind of in a similar boat to you where I'm kind of ranking a lot more on potential, I guess. This guy, he also was a rookie. I think now you know who he is. But he, from the get-go, he was just really balling out. I was trying to get him in a couple leagues. I kind of missed out, which is unfortunate. But last season, he put up 889 receiving yards, had 10 touchdowns, which is pretty crazy considering he was a rookie tight end. And while he's rookie, I assume he'll continue this, kind of like the reason I have Dalton Kincaid on this list. Where I mean, like, the reason why Kincaid is kind of still overshadowed last season was because of how great this guy was. This is Sam LaPorta. Sam LaPorta kind of overshadowed pretty much every rookie tight end last season, and I think there's a handful of rookie tight ends that played decently well. I mean, like, obviously Kincaid was there. I think Luke Musgrave, he played pretty good while he was healthy, and then even like the backup Tucker Kraft, right? He played good, but I feel like a lot of that was just overshadowed by how amazing Sam LaPorta was. And so I have my number 5 spot.
Great selection here. I'm not mad at him. I actually think you have him at his floor. I think very highly of this player. He's just amazing to watch as well. Another guy like Trey McBride. This is a guy I missed out on across the board in fantasy that I wanted to draft, but was like, I'd rather have Trey McBride or I'd rather have Kincaid because I thought there were better options than LaPorta. It turned out that gap was like closer than I really thought, and really Sam LaPorta flipped it on his head, where he got the opportunities and the offense provided him more opportunities to be what we now know him to be, which is amazing. Like all the credit in the world. He's a top 3 talent I was identifying in the draft as well. I think I had it as Kincaid, Schumacher, and then like LaPorta, somewhere in that order. And Schumacher obviously hasn't panned out yet so far. We'll see if he's able to overtake Ferguson on that depth chart. But Sam LaPorta, great talent. He could put up better numbers than Kelce this season, and I wouldn't blame. He's just that great, and the offense he's in is that great. My number 5 guy you had already talked about. He was the other rookie, Dalton Kincaid from last year. I really love this player. I think I mentioned this 1,000 times. For me, I think he has top 3 potential from a fantasy perspective. And it's kind of weird to say he had a worse season than Sam LaPorta, because you look at like rookie tight ends in the history of the NFL, like this guy put up a top 12 season out of all rookies in the history of the NFL, which is crazy, and even crazier for Sam LaPorta. He's a vertical option. You can throw him like contesting catch looks. And beginning of the season, he was limited as like a dump off player because so much of the attention went to Diggs. But I think with his expanding role now and his expanding route tree, like he is the number 1 in that offense because Keon Coleman still has to work on things like man-to-man in the pro game. Khalil Shakir hasn't proven to be that number 1 guy yet. He's a great complementing piece. I love him, but he still has some things to prove there. That leaves Curtis Samuel, which we know him as like a gadget guy, one of the best gadget guys in the NFL, but not a number 1 option. Kincaid is going to prove with more opportunities he's more successful because I believe in the talent of this player. So.
I think it's a good pick. I mean, like, I only had him like 2 spots lower than you, I think.
Yeah, how could you?
Yeah, got to kick me off of this, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of these guys, guys that I had maybe lower, if you had them way high, I wouldn't really been upset about that by any means. Any of the guys maybe up higher, if you had them a bit lower, just based off your own personal preferences, I feel like this is the least like intensive position of me being very firm about how I believe certain players are going to play. Whereas I feel like with the quarterbacks, running backs, and even receivers, you could feel more strongly about kind of where we're ranking some of these players. But for the tight ends, it's just like there's only so they're all producing around the same if we look at last season's stats.
Like 2 for 10 could be ranked in any order, pretty much.
Yeah, and because the guys on the lower end of the stats here, It could be from just the total snap share that they started out with throughout the season, just different situations that they're in. But we realistically, I think any of these top 10 guys on this list could lead the tight end receiving, title or whatever this upcoming season, and it could potentially not even be a guy on this list for all we know, but that's that.
That's fair. Gotta charge my computer, but I'll still be on, so you're good. Keep
Okay.
going.
Okay. Going to my number 4 player here. This is a guy we talked about already, I think. He's entering his 3rd season now. You're super high on him. Last season it was kind of his like breakout year. His rookie year, I think he didn't put up too much. Obviously, he was behind Zach Ertz. You know who this is now. But it's kind of interesting to see the trajectory of his season this last year too, because he started out the season in his first 5 games. He was under 50% snap share for most of it. And then week 6 and 7, he had about 58% and a 53% snap share. But then from week 8 on, he dominated the snap share with like the worst being like a 72%, where he still balled out and put up 100 receiving yards and had 11 targets, 10 catches. Trey McBride, he's really good. And I think even though his rookie year isn't like much experience, it is experience nonetheless. And like he's had that much short time in the NFL. And that's kind of why I put him just above guys like Sam LaPorta and Dalton Kincaid. Again, next season, this could all just completely rearrange in terms of how I view these guys. But I just liked the little bit of extra experience that he had, even though it wasn't much. Plus, you got to learn behind a guy like Zach Ertz, which I think is really valuable too. But yeah, so I have him at number 4.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting you put him over LaPorta. But I'm not gonna really question it when LaPorta, McBride, and Kincaid, they're all like very similar talents. Like, you can put them around the same area as far as like young talents. They're the future number 1 options of this NFL. They could be the 1, 2, 3 once Kelce retires, to be frank. Yeah. Not much to say on like him as a player. Like he's another guy where it's like I'm not worried about the situation going into the season, because the 2 main concerns, like in fantasy right now, is like who's the number 1 on the Cardinals? Is it McBride or Marvin Harrison Jr.? My answer to that is it shouldn't matter, because you detailed like the high reception and yardage totals. Like that's just a highlight of his big plays. But the other thing is like Harrison will complement McBride, and McBride will complement Harrison. Like Emmett Shea is going to draw safeties in the middle of the field. McBride can operate in the middle of the field as deep as he can. Even if Harrison earns more volume, defenses might key in on Harrison in the middle of the game, and that's going to open up opportunities for McBride. That's a scenario that can happen. And what could also happen is the inverse. Like McBride has had more experience, therefore he gets more say in the offense. So I think it's a good thing for McBride, because he's going to get more efficiency between targets. And that's going to lead to like explosive yardage total. But if he doesn't, it's because he's getting a lot of volume. So it's either going to be a volume increase or an efficiency increase. And that whole offense is going to be better in general from the start of the season, just because Kyler Murray is actually going to play a full season at the start. Like he's set up to play a full season. Like last season, he came in through like half the year. Imagine McBride's stats had Kyler Murray played like 3/4 of the season. He would be 1,000-yard receiver, which is wild to think about. Like so, yeah, definitely a guy that deserves this ranking for sure. For me, my number 4 guy is actually a more experienced player in the league, which is hard to say because he got drafted 7 years ago. This guy has had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, despite being in a very crowded and talented offense. He still put up 1,000 yards on 90 targets. A lot of these new weapons have had like 100 plus targets, and this guy's proven like on limited targets, he's still able to produce, still able to generate big plays. His longest reception was 66 yards, third highest in his career. Um, yeah, and the reason why I have him this high compared to a lot of the young talents I mentioned is because his run blocking is one of the best at his position. Um, you combine that with the fullback he plays with and the left tackle he plays with, they form one of the best run blocking trios you're ever going to see, which is why no matter what scheme his coach draws up, they're seemingly able to create like 30-yard gains for any running back, not being Christian McCaffrey. For me, it's George Kittle at number 4.
Yeah. Yeah, George Kittle, he balls out. I mean, like everybody knows George Kittle. I think this is a good spot for him. I mean, like these top 4 or 5-ish, I feel like are even that much more interchangeable. I feel like than even like the top 10 here. Even though I was saying, top 10 guys could potentially be ranked this high, but yeah, he balled out last season. Even he only had played 16 games as well, so he missed a game. He still put up 1,000 yards. So even by like the fan base that says, "Oh, it's not real," and if you play all 17 games or whatever, when they were trashing like, "Oh, like if potential records are broken, they'll say, oh, it's not there's an asterisk next to it or whatever." But like, I mean, he still does it in 16, so I guess that's cool for him. Um, but yeah, I mean, but like you said, I think the run blocking is what really separates him from the pack in comparison to a lot of other guys too.
Yeah, love to hear it. Who's your number 3 guy then?
My number 3 guy, he he only played 10 games last season. I mean, objectively, technically had a down year, obviously. But when you average out just the games, or at least his yardage per game with the games that he played and the yards he put up, he was on pace technically for about 924 receiving yards, which I think is pretty good. Obviously, he didn't play it, so it's not a real 924 yards. But over the past couple seasons, he's been kind of the focal point, at least in the receiving game for this team. It's a very run-heavy team too, and so the fact that he's able to put up such strong receiving yards from his position, I think is pretty remarkable. This is Mark Andrews from the Ravens. Yeah, I feel like he's consistently been just kind of like one of the receiving leaders for his team. And obviously Zay Flowers is there, and I think he'll continue to do good as well. But Mark Andrews has been the guy. I don't think he'll stop being the guy. And so that's why I have him here at number 3.
Yeah, a great selection here. Very experienced guy. He's actually had a career high of like 1,300 yards single season. So I think that's one of the things that stands out. So why you have him at 3. And I think the situation he's in, like think about adding Derrick Henry to that. You're going to open up a lot more play action opportunities. And who usually benefits from play action opportunities the most? It's the tight ends because
Mm-hmm.
you don't know if they're going to be blocking or they're going to be on runs. Like I think the fact that sorry, not Greg Roman, Todd,
Oh,
the new offensive coordinator, Tom Munkin.
mm,
Um, Todd Munkin being able to show that he can still generate a top 5 rushing offense despite the coordinator change is going to be important for like Mark Andrews because he's that much of a dual threat, more of a threat when the play action came, and the gravity that Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry present is going to more open up more opportunities for him because he can play in line, and because there's so much of attention on that backfield, he'll be able to sneak behind linebackers all day, every day. Give me Mark Andrews. I also have him at number 3 as well.
mm.
I love the talent and the spacing he provides for this offense. Another example like Trey McBride on just because there's added weapons to this offense now doesn't mean his opportunities are going to decrease. I think he's going to get more efficient opportunities, and he's still a red zone weapon. He's a better red zone weapon than Zay Flowers is because of the size and speed combination he does bring. Like Zay Flowers has some things to clean up after that Chiefs game, for sure. Like he needs to clean up a lot of his like turnover prone tendencies. So until he does that, I trust Mark Andrews more in those situations. So you're going to see those receiving touchdowns go up. And you saw a tangible difference once he went down in that Ravens passing game. When Mark Andrews was there, it was just like, oh gosh, this is a scary offense. And it wasn't like they had prime Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers and like Rashad Bateman living up to his draft building. It was mainly like just Zay Flowers, like once Mark Andrews went down. But I think the combination of those two is going to maintain Jackson's passing efficiency standards and maintain that the Ravens are a great offense in general. So the red zone opportunities are still going to be there for Mark Andrews to capitalize
on. Good choice.
You too, man.
Thanks. Now, ahead of time, I had told Josh that we probably didn't have the same number ones. And so I guess this is going to be controversial on him. Realistically, I think my 1 and 2 are probably the most interchangeable on this list. But my number 2 guy, he has had a career of balling out. I mean, I don't expect him to stop balling out until he stops balling out. Last season, he just barely missed 1,000 yards. Granted, he did miss 2 games. But when there was a lack of receiving options on this team, I think he's done a pretty good job at stepping up and taking over the focal point of the offense role, which is why I have him here. He's probably one of the best receiving tight ends in like the history of the NFL. But this is Travis Kelce from the Chiefs. Yeah, I mean he balls out. I mean, I think he was on the pace for about like 1,100 yards, which I wouldn't be surprised to see him do. Yeah, and like, I mean, we saw he kind of started out slow, I think, at the start of the season, which I don't think is really on him. But then we kind of saw him picking up at the end of the season. He balled out throughout the playoffs and everything. I don't really have any big complaints about him outside of his like blocking ability. But I don't know. That's kind of what I got on Travis Kelce.
Yeah. I mean, across the board, Corstian's been very, very he's underrating the Chiefs like best players. Like he did this with Mahomes. He did this with Kelce. So I'm like less mad that he's done this, but at the same time, this guy has been like the gold standard for tight ends for a reason. Nobody's had more 1,000-yard receiving seasons than he has from the tight end position. Like out of anyone in this group. So I'm surprised you kept him at 2. I think I know who your number 1 is based on that. From a football standpoint, I kind of understand it. From a statistical standpoint, I don't really understand it because I think there's a debate you can make with the receiving like skill sets and comparing them. But I'm not that too mad at this, seeing all the growth that the new tight ends come in. Like there's legitimate arguments on who's the best receiving tight end as far as talent now, with the age of Travis and the other ones. But to me, I still consider him the gold standard. My number 2 is a guy that could put up even better numbers than he is right now because of the offense he's in. Really great statistics. Despite the breakout season he had as a rookie with 86 receptions, 889 yards, 10 touchdowns, he didn't fumble the ball once. He had his longest play being 48 yards. He's been making 30-yard touchdown catches on the regular. Sam LaPorta is a guy that I think he's due for anywhere from 1,000 yards to 1,300 yards this season. He's that great. He has built on the trust that Jared Goff has in him. And I get it. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 1,500 yards. But I think it's possible that you could see 2 1,300-yard receivers in the Detroit Lions offense because their offense is that explosive where it can provide two options with that amount of statistics. So to me, this guy has it all. He's not afraid to go against cornerbacks and win one-on-one. I love the talent of this player as well. And the reason why I have him as 2 is because he's outperformed every rookie and young player in just one season, which is wild.
Yeah, I think that's a good valuation. I mean, I had him just a couple spots lower. So I mean, not really, no spot to complain about that. I think he definitely has that type of ceiling. Especially once guys like Kelce, Kittle, and Andrews kind of even Hockenson, I guess, kind of. I mean, he's not that old, but like once those guys start to slow down, if they ever do, I wouldn't be surprised to see LaPorta just hogging this number one spot for the next couple of years, unless there's another crazy tight end emergence. Maybe it'll be a competition between McBride, LaPorta, and Kincaid. Is just a cycling top three tight end, you know, fight, I guess, throughout their careers. But yeah, he's pretty good last season. Hopefully he does more.
So if Kelce wasn't your number one, who's the big number one?
Jonnu Smith, the man who stole Kyle Pitts' touches. Funny enough, though, Jonnu Smith had less receiving yards than Kyle Pitts, which really surprised me. Because the whole talk was Jonnu Smith was stealing all his touches, but like technically he did, but like Kyle Pitts put up better numbers. But anyways, going into my number one guy, it's kind of obvious now. It's George Kittle. He put up 1,000 yards last season, and it's kind of what had me put him over Travis Kelce was just the fact that he is such an elite run blocker. He had an 81.1 run block grade. Some of the other good blockers, in my opinion, the grades they had, Mark Andrews, I think he had a 58.8. TJ Hockenson had a 56.1 run blocking grade. And so just the level that George Kittle does have in the run blocking room for tight ends, I think he's probably one of the best, that can actually catch as well of all time. And then similarly, I think what was cool to see from him was he still, like, despite the talent on his team, I think he demanded still about a 20% target share from his offense, which really surprised me. It was just like maybe a percent off of Travis Kelce. And I mean, like, Travis Kelce is the focal point. It makes sense, but him having the 20%, and then you see George Kittle in a much more crowded room with that kind of same exact target share. Really, like,
he didn't have 100 targets. He had 90.
What was that?
He had like 30 less targets than Travis Kelce did all last season.
Yeah, but the percentage of team targets, it was about the same percentage.
Okay.
And so yeah, I mean, he had less catches. I mean, I guess which speaks to his run after catch ability, I guess. 30 less catches and still has 1,000 receiving yards. I guess is pretty impressive. But I do think Travis Kelce is a better, receiving tight end. But I think George Kittle is better at blocking than Kelce is at receiving, in between a comparison of the two. And that's kind of what led me to having Kittle just above Kelce. But like, again, next season, for all we know, this could change if we have different results. But yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think that it's obvious I kept Kelce at 1. I understand your argument about Kittle because with tight ends, they're probably the hardest position to play on the offense because you have so many offensive line responsibilities in the run game, as well as in the pass game. You're kind of trying to be like the unicorn. You really are the unicorn when you play that position. So to be able to be good at both is rare. I think for me with Kelce, even with I think the run block win rate stat you put up from PFF is like really key here because it just highlights how great San Francisco is in the run game because of their personnel and talent, and the fact that Kittle's like miles beyond other tight ends is really incredible, to be honest. But I think where the league is headed is using a detached tight end, as well as using them in condensed formations and making them more dangerous. I mean, Travis Kelce, even though he's what, 34 right now, like he's still in a position where he can still use his route running, still use reliable hands, and still like have athletic ability,
Mhm.
even if it's declining slowly. Like because of the way the Chiefs use him. It's
Mhm.
not anything against Kittle, but the Chiefs literally had to use him as the wide receiver one and starting tight end last season. If you
Mhm.
think about the surrounding cast, like where Tony literally lost them the game against like um who was it? They lost against the Bills because of Kadarius Tony.
Mhm.
If that had gone through, think about the quarterback stats Kelce would have had on that one play alone.
Mhm.
That's a Hall of Fame statement, like moment right there.
Mhm.
And then against the Patriots, like the reason why I'm highlighting Tony, who was cut by the way today,
Yeah.
is because that's kind of the level of talent they were dealing with. And Rushy Rice, for all the performances he's had last season, he had to be schemed open in order to alleviate pressure on Kelce because there's so much of attention that's placed on him. And the
Mhm.
fact that he was able to put up near 1,000 yards on like less games than he usually plays is pretty darn special.
Mhm.
It's pretty darn special. Um, like it wasn't the best season last year, but the fact they were still able to win the Super Bowl with him as their primary option, I just have to put him on
Mhm.
because just because of the situation he had to navigate. Not necessarily. I
Mhm.
get the argument about Kittle. Now that you make it, I'm like, that's a perfectly valid take from looking at like how a tight end's supposed to play the position. But for me, looking at the circumstances that Kelce had to walk into, it
Mhm.
wasn't picture perfect like Kittle, where like he had the surrounding cast where it's like, oh, his efficiency is going to go way up. Plus, he's really good at a run. And that's nothing against Kittle. That's just an awesome team building strategy the 49ers had. They've always been great at it.
Mhm.
But with Kelce, it was in a not an ideal situation, kind of possibly the worst circumstance the Chiefs been in years. Like he was still able to produce these numbers.
Mhm.
And keeping in mind like his history with a Tyreek Hill, this guy is putting up like 1,200 yards at minimum with a Tyreek
Mhm.
Hill on the opposite side, where so much of the big play potential goes to him. I think over the course of his career and going forward, I just think Kelce has a better track record than Kittle. Although it's really, really close between the two.
Mhm.
Like for the longest time, it was literally Andrews, Kittle, Kelce. And
Mhm.
that was the trio right there. And I think it's still Kelce. I think it's still Kittle.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah. I I see no reason why Kelce should not be number one on my list. So that's why I have him here.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and you like talked a little bit about like how teams are going more towards like tight ends being lined out, but I still, there's still a lot of teams that will have a less experienced tight end or a tight end that, dominates more in the receiving aspect, and then they end up signing like two tight ends purely for run block or one or two like run blocking tight ends. I know the Broncos are doing this last season where, they had one guy who was like decent at receiving, but then the rest of their tight end room was four blockers. And just the fact that you don't have to worry about that with Kittle was that. But I for all I know, I could have had Travis Kelce as my number one guy, and I don't. I mean, like I wouldn't really complain about me having him number one. You have him at number one. I don't think it's an issue at all. Because obviously,
Next season, it could be Sam LaPorta at the top of this list,
Mhm.
and I wouldn't
Yeah,
even blink. So
yeah. It'll be interesting how the tight end just kind of shift in the next couple of years, especially with the emergency young guys. Um, Especially because most tight ends, like on a historical basis, they take about I think it's like 25 years old is kind of the breakout age for most tight ends, and the fact that we've had so many breakout as young as they have, um, you know, for all we know, they'll get that much better by the time they're 25. Plus, whichever other kind of breakout tight ends we start to see in the next couple seasons is what they're getting drafted. But yeah.
alrighty, guys, that was our list. So a little bit of surprise from Corstian there at the top of his list. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Um, next season, I mean next week, we'll be going into the next season. Kind of preview a couple of our games going into week one. I think it should be a lot of fun. I think we got are the Packers and the Eagles playing like first
Mhm.
game out. Is
I
that
think
what's
so.
happening? I have not been paying attention to the NFL season, so I have no idea who's gonna be the first matchup we even see. It's been wild at work so far. No, it is actually a rematch of the AFC Championship game coming up on Thursday. Is Baltimore Ravens and Kansas City Chiefs,
Oh yeah.
and then it's followed by Green Bay and the
Mm.
Eagles. That's interesting. They're starting Friday games now. Okay,
Mhm.
alrighty. So yeah, we'll preview a couple matchups in week one, our favorite matchups going into the season. Overreaction week one, that should be fun. The first couple of episodes, the episode following that. But stay tuned. Follow us on our I'm on a mission page on YouTube. We have a lot of interesting videos and content. Our Instagram, amon.a.mission. We appreciate the support very much. And we'll see you next week to start recapping week one. I'm really excited for the season coming up.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. But
we'll tell you about our fantasy rosters when we get them set too. So you guys take care, take it easy, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.